Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar. I'm just going to stall for a quick moment here while people start getting logged on, and then I'll go over a few notes and we'll get started. So just hang in there for a second while I let everybody get their login and their video going. Perfect. Okay. All right. Well, welcome to today's webinar. For those of you who have attended our classes before, as always, welcome back. To anyone who is new, welcome. We're glad that you're here. I just am going to go over a few quick notes, and then I'll hand the class over to Michael, who's our instructor today, to get started.
Thanks, Sally.
Hey, hello again. All right, so just a couple of notes for you guys. This is a webinar format, so it's a little bit different for those of you who are used to the meetings. We can't see you or hear you during this class, so when you have your questions, open up that Q&A box on your menu, type your questions in, and Michael and I will both be monitoring those today. Michael's going to be answering the questions as he sees them come in. I'm on hand if you need any assistance with anything else. We are recording today, so if you need to leave early for any reason, or if you want to access the class following the conclusion, it'll be available usually about 24 hours after the class on our YouTube channel, and we'll be sending that out by email as well. If you have any technical issues during the class, please do let me know, and I'll be happy to assist you as best I can. And I believe that covers everything on my end. So quick introduction, Michael, and then I'll let you dive in. For those of you who don't know Michael, he's the arborist at our Fair Oak store. Michael, you do so much for us. I might let you just give a little bit of an explanation, but I know you're one of the buyers for our trees, and I know you're always very busy with a variety of things at the store. So he's going to talk about native trees with us today in celebration of Arbor Day, and I suppose Earth Day as well. So we're glad to have you today.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
thanks, Sally. Absolutely. Happy Earth Day. Happy Arbor Day, everybody. Yeah, I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me. So as Sally mentioned, I'm the company arborist for Merrifield, and we all wear a lot of hats. So yes, I'm involved in our plant procurement process. It's a wonderful team of us, a job that could never be done by one person. So that we all work super hard to do that. And on any given day, you'd find me out in our woody plant sections or bouncing around the herbaceous areas also. Helping customers with information and facilitating purchases. So yeah, if you need to find me, I'm available here round the clock, just about any day. I can always be reached. If you call the store, they can transfer you to my cell phone, my email, everything is public. So I'd be happy to chat with you and help you with anything you might need. But yeah, I was really excited to be asked to come speak with everybody and share a little bit about native trees. That is certainly what I'm passionate about. While I'm the company arborist, I'm a plant geek at heart, so it's not just trees that interest me. I've got a selection of native stuff I tucked in here behind me. I'm a woody plant, guy and an arborist, but a perennial gardener at heart. So I've got a nice selection of tiarella and woodland phlox behind me here, some native deciduous azaleas, which are my favorites. But yeah, so if anybody has any questions about anything and everything native, I'm always happy to bounce ideas around. Without further ado, you all are here for presentation, so I'm going to get cracking with you guys. So today's presentation is on native trees. Sally, am I sharing correctly? Everything look good?
yes, I can see your presentation.
Awesome. So native trees, our native forests, and I can't say enough about our native ecosystems. There's so many different ecosystems in this area specifically. We're so fortunate to live in an area where we really do get the diversity that you would see, in the mountainous regions, in the Piedmont coastal plains. We get all of it here in Northern Virginia, and we're just so fortunate to have access to all of that. it's a great area for resources in general. We are such a diverse area, but then when it comes to the local ecology, I mean, it's just magnificent. You can literally in 20 minutes be west and be in a complete mountain ecosystem, and just the same be in the coastal plains, or marshland. And I'm so grateful to have grown up in this area, and have gotten to observe species and both flora and fauna, and really have had an opportunity to immerse myself in it professionally as well. So, again, we're talking about native trees specifically for Arbor Day, and for Earth Day. And I think a really good starting point is why are natives important? You can make an argument for any ornamental tree, and its ornamental value. But when it comes down to it, why are natives so important? Why is this a hot button topic? Why are we seeing an increase value in natives? Why is this a buzzword right now? And the truth of the matter is that it's so far beyond what we can comprehend that I can't even share with you all, every bit of it today. But the things that we can observe, that we know that are happening, are the ways that we see wildlife benefiting from the native plants. Now, again, we're focusing heavily on trees here, but it's native plants in general. Whether it be a food source for wildlife, which is obviously our first and foremost concept. Okay, we need to plant natives because they provide a food source for the local wildlife that has evolved and developed in those areas where the native plants have. It's coevolution, but it's not just that. It's also sometimes those native plants are providing a food source for the food source of the wildlife, and the wildlife we're observing is really, twice removed from the actual benefit of that food source. Or potentially it's a source of a home, or it's a structure that is comfortable to whatever wildlife is native in that area, or it's habitat. And what's so amazing is even in these habitats, as they change, they cater to different species of wildlife. So the most important thing to understand is the fauna and the flora go hand in hand. You won't have the fauna that you covet and that you appreciate and value if you don't have the flora and the ecology to support them. Similarly, you won't have the flora if you don't have the right environment to support that flora's development. So it's imperative that we identify what area, what the environment is, what flora will benefit there, what functionality you're after, and then what fauna you're trying to bring in if that's your objective. So I always try to, and Sally, is the bottom of my screen cut off, or is that just my toolbar that's cutting off? Can you see the whole right?
I can only see half of it. It's because
okay.
of the location of my Zoom menu, but other people may be in the same situation.
Okay, great. So the bottom of this screen says right tree, right place. I don't care whether you're planting ornamentals, natives, whatever you're doing, you've got to set yourself up for success when you're planting. So the right tree in the right place. And then I always throw in, Bruce Nash would be remiss if one of his students and offspring didn't include the right function. The right function, right tree, right place, size-wise, performance, environmental preference, tolerance, etc., and then providing the functionality that you're after. If you need evergreen screening in the wintertime and you plant a deciduous tree in there, I don't care if it's the perfect environment and it's the perfect size, it's not going to provide what you're after at that moment. So similarly, This is a great example here. You see on the back side of the house here, you've obviously got a sycamore towering over the house, providing shade. So that's obviously insulating in the wintertime, cooling in the summertime, and it's the right size tree for that space to perform that function. Similarly, you've got a smaller ornamental blooming tree underneath the power lines. It's not going to encroach in the power line space. That tree is set up to be successful there for a length of time in the future. I just want to, before we really get into the categories here, I want to just address real quickly. I saw two comments come through. Personal questions, I'm going to ask everybody if they would please contact us at the store. I probably will not address too many really personal specific questions. I'm more than happy to address questions and comments that are relevant to the topic. And if you have a question throughout the presentation, by all means, please chime in. If you're thinking about it, someone else somewhere else is likely also sharing the same inquiry. So I'm more than happy to address relevant questions. So again, talking about trees, we could get very scattered. So I thought I would kind of break it up into size and categories of trees and rattle through a few that I think are ecologically outstanding and are good performers that we should be planting. So I wanted to start with overstory canopy trees. Quercus are your mighty oaks. In alphabetical order here, you've got white oak, swamp white oak, scarlet oak, bur oak, pin oak, willow oak, and northern red oak. The image here is an image of a white oak in a field. It's your quintessential national tree, and it is for a reason. Oaks are absolutely fantastic trees. They grow in a wealth of diverse environments. There is an oak for every soil type and every light type. They are one of the most intelligent tree species that we have. Not to mention, they are one of the most beneficial food sources for so much wildlife. Douglas Tallamy had cataloged over 500 species of moths and butterflies that our white oak supports. And again, different tree species will benefit different fauna species in different ways, and will attract different wildlife. I think this past 10 days or 2 weeks, let's say, I saw the Virginia Department of Wildlife put out a publication on their social media, and it was jokingly saying, in Northern Virginia, we don't just have 4 seasons, we have 12, and currently we are in the pollinating. So I think oaks often get a bad rap for being such a heavy pollen producer, but remember, those are flowers. Those are male flowers that are doing their job to reproduce and continue on, with reproduction and with cross-pollination and development of new species. Oaks are very promiscuous, so we get a lot of hybrid oaks out there that are not necessarily identified and created, cataloged as a new species, but there's a great deal of diversity from oaks. I know anybody who's got big oaks on their property has got to be familiar with the saplings you see after our, region's greatest farmers, the squirrels, are caching acorns all over the place. But remember, it's not just the acorns that are providing a food source. That's the obvious, fruit is always obvious for us. I've seen this yellow-rumped warbler. I observed that on my mother's willow oak. That's the image here. And I watched this bird bouncing around and plucking bud scales off from where the flower buds had descended from the branch and the vegetative buds had started to break, and you're now seeing some small leaves emerge. I actually watched this bird bouncing around and plucking the bud scales off of the leaves. Now, in retrospect, I look back on it and I observed this bird doing what I thought was consuming those bud scales. Warblers are migratory species, some overwinter, but it's very possible that this bird has learned that its insect of choice, its food source of choice is an insect that possibly is found underneath those bud scales, and perhaps he's gotten in the habit of plucking those vegetative bud scales off and searching for the insects that are underneath for food source. So it's just, there's so many things going on that we are beyond what we're able to observe. Sycamore, our native sycamores, great tree for an anaerobic soil environment, for a wet soil, for a compacted soil. Obviously you see the fruit up in the corner there, the nuts, the sycamore nuts are roughly, I'm going to say, about the size of a golf ball, a little bit bigger than an acorn. Absolutely essential food source for local wildlife. But remember, it's also, it's also imperative that we create habitat for wildlife. So these two fledgling owls, their nest is in this sycamore. So their parents laid eggs in a cavity in the trunk of this tree, and we're able to raise them to fledglings to the point that they were able to fledge the nest and be successful on their own. So it's important that we understand that the diversity of our native forests must be maintained in our landscapes as well as in the native forests. The more development we see, the more destruction of native forests we see, the more we have to do our part. As Doug Tallamy references in his book, Bringing Nature Home, or Bringing Nature to Your Home, it's so imperative that we do our part on our own private properties. Big trees are crucial to the local ecology because of the fruit production, because of the flower production. It's tenfold on a large tree compared to a smaller tree, but then they also will develop cavities that will create homes for wildlife such as these owlets. And similarly, this large sweet gum provided refuge from the rain for that little bear cub. So sweet gum, liquid ambar. Sweet gum is another one. This is one of our most underutilized native trees. I cannot emphasize enough how absolutely durable this tree is. I love planting sweet gums. This is a tree that would survive long past most of our other trees in harsh conditions. You can find them growing in wetland environments. You can find them growing, in marshes. Similarly, they are planted as the main street tree planting through my neighborhood on the main drag that cuts through the community. And they are in concrete hard clay, receive full sun from sunup till sundown, not a drop of supplemental irrigation, and are absolutely flawless. And not to mention their ornamental value. I mean, you have this just magical fall color, everything from, yellows to oranges to crimson red to, this deep black, almost, purple, almost black tone that you see. And similarly, you can see in the image here, there's the flowers, the male and female flowers are coming out on this tree. And then after the flowering cycle, they will go to fruit and they will produce the seed head that you see descending from the branch there. What's amazing to me is to see the wildlife that goes after this seed head. I've seen everything from, deer to birds going after the seeds that come out of that seed head. So again, this is a swampy environment. Anybody who's familiar with prothonotary warblers knows that they occur around wetlands. This is a sweet gum that was growing in literally directly in the water. Black gum or black tupelo. This is another incredibly hard-wooded tree. Black gum is a smaller fruit. It does produce more of a, it's a drupe. It's more of a berry type fruit. It's all up in the upper portions of the canopy. People ask me all the time when they're buying a black gum and they're planting it with hopes to get the fruit development, is it messy? And my answer is no. I've rarely to never seen the fruit from a black gum on the ground, because the birds get them so quickly and take off with them that you wouldn't even know that they produced a fruit when they do. Black gum's another one. I mean, this is a tree. The larger tree in the image here in red fall color is actually the black gum here on the property at our Fair Oaks store. And embarrassingly, we do not treat that tree with much care. But to speak to its durability, the tree is absolutely flawless. I mean, that image was taken just a few years ago. It looks the same today. It is growing in essentially a gravel parking lot. Has obviously tolerated the soil compaction from cars being driven over top of the root system back there. It's thrived through wet years. It's thrived through drought years. I've seen black gums growing in forest conditions where they're in very high organic matter, very swampy soil conditions. The other thing I always mention with black gums is it is one of the hardest woods in our native forest. So in 2010, when we had our Snowmageddon snowstorm, we got 3 storms back to back. The lowest branch on this tree had about 30 inches of snow packed on top of it. And I just remember being so terrified that when that froze, it was going to ice over and the weight was going to cause that lowest limb to fall off, because it's just this massive limb that hangs way out. And it didn't. And that was the same year that we had maples and oaks and everything else in the forest, breaking from the weight of the snowfall. So ulmus is elm. Our native elms are just a miraculous part of not only the forest ecosystem but the landscape. The umbrella shaped canopy is an identifying characteristic of these trees. They are a massive presence in the landscape. Really a majestic marker for any property. But similarly, they provide a great food source and a great home for so many local species. You're getting down to a smaller sized fruit. You can see with the size of the seed there, but again, that's still a valuable food source for a lot of seed eaters. Not only that, but the flowering from the trees is very attractive to a lot of insects that are then a food source for these birds. And similarly, you're going to get a huge number of moths and butterflies that are attracted to elms for a variety of reasons. Basswood is a tree that I think for a long time was just a member of our native forests and was really off of people's radars. The flowering for basswood or American linden is debatably one of our more beneficial flowers for pollinators such as bees. The flowering on a basswood, you can see in the middle image here, there is almost looks like a dried leaf there. That's actually the bract that subtends the flowers. So that comes out as a very kind of creamy white color. And that against the backdrop of the green leaves is actually quite ornamental. There's a lot of green spire lindens, which is Tilia cordata. It's a European tree. There are a lot of green spire lindens that are planted ornamentally and commercially throughout Northern Virginia. There's plenty in Old Town Fairfax area and near Fairfax Circle. I know the street that I grew up on as a kid was lined with an alley of little leaf lindens. And so many of you may be familiar with that scene where you've got that almost bicolor leaf effect where it looks like it's a green and white variegation, when in fact it's actually the tree going to bloom. But if you ever observe one of these trees when they're in bloom, they come to life. I mean, it's like the tree is moving. There are so many pollinators buzzing around those flowers. And I'm not just talking about bees, I'm talking about every single pollinator in the region is active at the time these trees go into flower, because they are a little bit later. Again, it's not a super ornamental blossom, but the overall display is quite pretty. And then again, you see they go to seed here, which seeds are certainly fruits of trees, and they will support wildlife seed eaters. Acer is our maple group. So this is a sugar maple. We know maples for a beautiful fall color. Here's a great display. This is my neighborhood, a red maple versus a sugar maple going into fall color. And then I don't think that people give them the credit that they deserve for their spring flowering. The bottom image there is an image of a red maple in flower. Typically the sugar maples are a green blossom, so I don't really consider those quite as ornamental. But red maples produce, while it's not an individual ornamentally fantastic blossom like a cherry blossom or a dogwood, the overall display of the tree is stunning. You get this just kind of red haze. The whole tree goes into this vibrant red color because it's covered from head to toe in these small, delicate red blossoms. Red maple, to me, even beyond red buds and before red buds, is the marker that spring is arriving. It's, often it's February when we start getting our red maple flowers kicking into gear. And that really, to me, is always that feeling of reprieve. You're finally at the end of winter when you start to see the forest edge come to life with the red maple flowers. And then after they're done blooming, they then, once they're fertilized, will go to seed, and we're all familiar with the helicopters or whirligigs that are all over the lawn. But that is a food source, right? So we are remembering that not only are these trees' seeds a mechanism for reproduction for the trees, but every tiny little seed, no matter how big or small, is a food source for wildlife that relies very heavily on it. As you can see, the squirrel is cracking into the seed part of the helicopter. The helicopter itself is just a mechanism to spread that seed, which is a very intelligent evolution. And again, this is another great example of how native trees benefit our local wildlife. I'm a big wildlife photographer, so every observation I make is kind of like a new light bulb turns on. But this black bear was seeking shade. This image was taken in July, and you could see she was hot. She was trying to get out of the sun. She was looking for a place to eat. She could see these grapevines loaded with fruit. And then she spotted this perfect perch in this maple. And so she climbed this red maple, and she perched up there and sat there eating the grapevines, eating the grapes off of the grapevine for, quite a while we sat there observing her. And it's so important to remember that, again, the maple here was not the food source. The maple was the structure that the vine was able to grow on, that the grapevine was able to grow on and get off the ground and produce grapes, and was a refuge for this black bear who was trying to get out of the sun. So here she's up in the tree canopy. Trees' leaves are transpiring and are releasing water in the form of vapor, which is cooling things down. And it's also able to it's also then able to provide a structure for the vines to climb on so that they can be mature enough to go to fruit. I noticed somebody in the chat had asked about the previous group of trees, they were lindens. I had referenced Tilia americana, which is American basswood or American linden. River birch is another one that I think river birch really needs no introduction. I mean, exfoliating bark, tolerant of wet soils, hence the name river birch. Gorgeous shape, gorgeous dappled shade, smaller leaflet. But what I think people overlook is how beautiful their flowering display is. Again, we consider it a pollen stick, and I think I'm probably a little jaded on the subject of pollen, and I work outside, so it's easy for me to say because I'm certainly acclimated to the great pollinating, but it's a gorgeous flowering display when birch produce their flowers. I mean, you've got just the leaves starting to emerge. It's this very vibrant, light new growth green, new signs of life, and then you've got this golden flower that's draping down from the branches that's subtended by the new leaves emerging. And I've observed the same group of birds, yellow warblers, as they are migrating through the area. And again, you have to remember, it's very hard to know for sure. But what I have observed, this appears to be the same group of 50 to 75 yellow warblers at the same time each year as they're migrating through our property here at the Fair Oaks Merrifield is on their migration path for whatever reason. And they stop in the same trees every year for about 3 days to a week as they're on their journey northward to, their northern breeding grounds. And what I find so interesting is that the entire flock of these migratory yellow warblers will go to the same trees, and they seem to be doing the same thing year after year. They're going to the birch at this point when they are in bloom, new leaves are emerging, and just as that yellow-rumped warbler was in the willow oak off my mother's deck, they're going to the flowers, they're going to the bud scales, they're searching for their preferred food source, which their preferred food source is quite obviously an insect that prefers river birch and honey locust. And I've observed this now for probably about 5, 6, 7 years running. And every year it is reliable. When I see the birches at the front of the property here go into bloom and those flowers are fully open like they are in this image, I go up there and check in the morning when I'm opening the gate by the traffic light. And sure enough, those warblers are bouncing around those trees. They never leave the birches and the honey locust. They will go back and forth between birch, and sometimes they'll bounce into the honey locust, but they never leave those trees for other trees. So there's an obvious reason, that, again, I'm not 100% sure what that reason is, but it's undeniable that those native trees that have evolved with that native species of fauna support each other in some way. So on to our understory canopy. Again, I mentioned earlier, it's very important to consider species diversity, size diversity when we're talking about native trees and the ecology they support. So our native American hornbeam, I was so fortunate. I was at a customer's house yesterday. I saw what very well may be the most beautiful specimen of American hornbeam I've ever seen in my life. Yesterday, I was in complete awe. It was a multi-stem, umbrella-shaped tree. I just have never seen one quite that mature or quite that impressive before. Take a look at the seeds here in front of us. Again, you've got a much smaller seed here, but what's a little bit difficult to identify is the number of insects that are actually on that seed down in the bottom of it there. And again, so maybe the seed is attracting some wildlife. Maybe the seeds are attracting some insects, and maybe those insects are attracting more wildlife. So it's a multi-layered thing here. The left bottom corner, you can see the flowering here, similar to the river birch, that beautiful early spring candlestick pollen flower that you see. Same thing. It's attractive to so many species. The other thing that I want to point out here is the species that you had seen just previously. This is a yellow-crowned night heron that had made a home just adjacent to the bog near my home, and it was a nesting pair, and they were using the bog to hunt, and they had nested just over the forest canopy on the other side. They would come and hunt the bog every day, and then they used that bog as a training ground to teach their young, after they had fledged the nest, how to hunt. But the entire bog is surrounded by American hornbeams. This is a great tree. Again, it'll grow anywhere. It'll grow in a rock hard, bone dry soil. It will also grow natively. It wants to occur along creek banks, in floodplains, in marshlands, in boggy areas. The whole backside of the bog is surrounded by these hornbeams. So these birds were using these hornbeams as hunting perches while they were really getting a read on where the crayfish were, where the frogs were. So again, often it's, the trees may provide a food source, but they also could provide a vantage point, a perch that allows those, the wildlife to find their food source. Redbuds, what can I say about our native redbuds? I mean, this is, as I mentioned earlier, while I consider the red maples kind of the kickoff for spring, definitely I think a lot of people, and myself included, redbuds are the marker, like, hey, it's here now. Spring is underway. The flowers, for those of you who are not familiar, the flowers are edible and are quite sweet. So you do get, again, if something's edible to us, you can be sure that the wildlife likes it as well. They're very heavy seed producers. You can see this dense cluster of seeds. Redbuds have been moved from, but once were categorized in the pea family. You can see the bean pods here. That it's a delectable food source for a wealth of wildlife. But again, those flowers in bloom, that is an imperative resource for your early active pollinators. On warm days in the early spring when the redbuds are blooming, they'll be humming with insects, bees, everything, you name it. There were redbuds in bloom. I had seen my earliest swallowtails, not just a tiger swallowtail. I saw a zebra swallowtail out in the woods the other day, which I thought was really early for them. But just on the other side of the forest from where I was, there were redbuds in bloom, and I was watching the butterflies bouncing around them. So again, you've got to have food sources available for all wildlife, but you have to remember there are days in early spring where we warm up, and when those insects need food source, they have got to have nectar available to them right then and there, or they are going to tire easily. Service berry is another great food source. This one, I don't know how many of you are familiar with service berry. Sometimes people call it Juneberry or shadblow. Juneberry because the fruits typically are ripening in June, July, but they are very similar to a blueberry. Stunning spring flowering, stunning fall color, great native tree. There are multiple different species that naturally occur here. It's a rose family member, so the blossoms are quite rose-like, and the fruits are as well. You see the bottoms of them looking an awful lot like an apple. But serviceberry is just a host to a wealth of different species. Sweet bay magnolia. I had somebody in the Q&A ask about tips for growing sweet bays. There's not too much you need to know. Tips for growing trees in general. When you plant a tree, trees need deep, thorough saturations infrequently. And I emphasize the infrequently, because often where people fail is killing them with kindness, so to speak. Trees in the forest, when we had we had a significant drought last spring. It's no secret. I'm not afraid to talk about it, but you don't see our entire forest ecosystem giving it up and dying after literally not one drop of rain we got through last spring. So that should be a lesson to anyone who's concerned about watering. I'm not suggesting you don't water, but what I am suggesting is that when you water, you simulate a weekend's worth of rain, and then you allow the soil to dry out between waterings and really give the trees a chance to have some oxygen exchange in the soil, and harden off. Weaning them off of constant waterings is definitely the objective. Nobody wants to be out watering every other day or every week if they can avoid it. That being said, you have to water a little bit more frequently through establishment. That said, there are definitely species that are more tolerant of anaerobic soils, which is why we tend to find them growing in compacted soils, in wet soils. Sweet bay would be one of them. Our native sweet bay is certainly a water lover. You will find them naturally occurring in wetland areas. The Great Dismal Swamp is an excellent example of sweet bays thriving in their natural environment. They're one of like 4 or 5 species that is the predominant species there. Bald cypress, sweet bay, clethra, and American holly, of all things. I don't think people realize how much moisture in the soil American hollies will appreciate, never mind tolerate. But yeah, sweet bays are a magnificent addition to any landscape. It's a great semi-evergreen, glossy foliage, great flowering. You can see the fruit here as well. I've seen I can't even begin to tell you the number of species I've seen that have been feeding on the actual fruit of sweet bay magnolias. It's absolutely astonishing. Similarly, when you really get in, when those flowers open up on a magnolia and you start to look inside of them, you realize it's a bowl of insects that are feeding on them. Viburnum is, I think, one of my favorite small trees, and I categorize viburnum as a tree and a shrub. I think we typically consider them shrubs, but remember, often what a large shrub will be able to develop into is also a small tree. So that's very important that that you keep in mind your options are not limited to what you might find in a tree section, so to speak. We have to group our plants here: herbaceous, perennials, annuals, shrubs, trees. But don't allow that to limit your options. Often when I am striking out with ideas for small trees in landscapes, I'm walking through our shrub section and I'm looking for witch hazels or viburnums or something comparable. Even aronia, chokeberry, which is one of the plants I have in behind me here. Those are things that I look at to diversify the palette and to create opportunities where something else just isn't fitting the bill. Even some of our deciduous azaleas will perform wonderfully as a small tree. And then look at the fruit production here from this viburnum. Now, this is an absolutely invaluable resource for these birds. So this actually, this fruit sets in the fall. The plant goes into fall color. The fruit is ripening through the fall. The fall color on black haw viburnum is this really beautiful scarlet red. That dark navy blue ink colored fruit really pops on the leaf color, but the birds don't touch them. As soon as the leaves drop, we get some really good cold temperatures, and all of a sudden you start to see these fruits wrinkling just a little bit. All the way on the far left side of this image, away from the bird, you can see there's just this tiny sign of some of those fruits starting to wrinkle. That's when they seem to become delectable for your birds and your fruit eaters, your cedar waxwings, etc. And I've watched eruptions of waxwings, flocking to this understory native, and just literally stripping the fruit from them in hours. But this image I took up at Great Falls, along the canal there. Pretty much the entire understory consists of black haw viburnum, and it is incredible to watch the waxwings. Right around Christmas time, I want to say, is when I took this image. It's incredible to watch the waxwings go from the overstory canopy, dropping down to the black haw viburnums, consuming the fruit, back and forth, and on some years there could be thousands of them. It's miraculous, and it's very eye-opening to observe. So evergreens, again, I'm going to talk about habitat a little bit, talk about homes. All of that is a part of planting for wildlife. And keeping in mind a mix of everything gives you diversity of what species, your landscape can support. You can see some American holly poking through the branches of the eastern white pine here. This is a great shelter for small songbirds that overwinter here or non-migratory. Similarly, the food source, these American hollies, here's an image of the American holly flower. We don't typically think of American hollies as big ornamental bloomers. They do flower. All plants flower, except for ferns, gymnosperms, fern-like species, mosses, spike mosses, etc. But the plants we purchase, no matter how large or small or ornamental, or if you got to get down and do your belly botany to observe, they bloom, and the blooms support something, whether it be the reproduction of the tree, going to fruit, going to seed, that supports the wildlife, whether it be the insects at the time of year. American hollies in general are an early bloomer. They're blooming in the spring. These are packed out with insects. And when I say packed out with insects, again, this isn't anything anyone needs to be concerned about. Don't think that insect attraction means pests, right? There's thousands and thousands of species of beneficial insects, as well as the harmful landscape pests. So these hollies, when they're in bloom, are quite attractive to a lot of our local native pollinator insects. And then the fruits that they produce are very ornamental. Hollies are known for their winter interest. And you've got great fruit set on them in the wintertime with the backdrop of that lovely evergreen glossy foliage. And then somehow, similar to the black haw viburnums, the fruits persist all winter. No one seems to touch them or care about them. And then right as I noticed the first real strong populations of returning migrant robins start to come back, is when I noticed they are going after those holly fruits. And I think it's a similar situation where they're a little bit too hard. They're a little bit, distasteful. They're not ripe enough. And that returning migration, temperatures, season, length of days, coincides with how long that fruit has been on the plant and the ripening of the fruit, and everything lines up perfectly. And it's not coincidental. These are species that have evolved this way for thousands, millions of years. It's an incredible relationship. It's unbelievable to watch. And it happens all at once. I mean, those American hollies on the wood, I took this image on the wood line here of our tree section at Fair Oaks. And to watch those hollies be loaded with fruit all winter long, only to get stripped in 1 week's time, as these robins have made this journey back from their southern overwintering grounds and are obviously starving. This is a great amount of energy, great sugar food source for them. It's just incredible to think about how this has developed over time. Our native eastern red cedar, I had already mentioned the cedar waxwings. They're a fruit lover. They also appreciate the juniper cones, the female cones. For those of you that don't know, you won't catch me calling these juniper berries. They are not berries. They are the female cones of a juniper. Junipers are dioecious plants. There are male and female plants. Our eastern red cedar is one of our most beneficial evergreens that you could possibly plant. The female cones are an attractive food source for much of our local wildlife. And then what's really interesting is to see the other species of birds and insects that appreciate these trees and at different times. You know, the images on this slide, the crested flycatcher and the eastern bluebird, that's the same branch of the same tree in the same place. Literally, you know, I like this kind of forest edge here because it sets alone, and the new growth whips that come out seem to produce this desirable perch for all sorts of different songbirds. And it's just interesting to see how many different species of birds will flock to these trees. What's also interesting is the tree that you see in the image here, the broad spectrum picture of the whole tree. What's also interesting is to see the species that will benefit from the trees when they're this foliated all the way to the ground, 100% canopy coverage, we call that, when it's branched from ground to apex of tree, versus the species that they attract when they're a little bit more mature and the canopy has raised up and there's a little bit of an understory setting beneath the canopy of the tree and they're not branched all the way to the ground. Pines, so this is we're jumping into a different category here. I'm going to come back to this one in 1 second. I want to jump around here. So this is what I'm talking about. These prairie warblers here, this yellow bird, these are Virginia scrub pines. And this is a great example of what I'm referencing when I'm talking about the eastern red cedars. So the eastern red cedar, Virginia scrub pines, these are plants that are very scrubby, understory brush type of plantings, very dense, hard to navigate through. As a person, you wouldn't typically go venturing into a young juvenile scrub pine red cedar grove, but it's a habitat for very specific species. So if you do research on this yellow prairie warblers their habitat is young scrub pine and red cedar forest. As soon as those habitats begin to mature, the birds move on. They won't persist in that area because the habitat is no longer hospitable for what they need, which is very interesting. Again, it's hard for me to understand exactly why that is, but they like that younger, and again, I'm going to back up here so you can see exactly what I'm talking about, but they like that younger branched all the way to the ground, eastern red cedar, dense, not even this out in an open plain like this. They want an entire, multiple acres packed with branched to the ground scrub brush. And as soon as these trees start to drop their lower branches and mature, those birds move on and they find the next spot to go. So pines, our eastern white pines, fabulous food source for wildlife. Again, it's not just the tree itself, but it is. The tree, the newly emerging candles are very rich in vitamin C. They, again, are edible for humans. You can be sure if you are eating them, then the wildlife will also consume them. The pine cone, you can see here the strobili on the pine cone, which are the individual seeds of the cone. That's a great food source. The ends of the strobili here, and you can see it on the trunks of pines, they're dripping with sap. That sap is very rich in sugar. That's attractive to a wealth of wildlife. You're talking about, if you pour sugar on the ground, think about all the ants and insects that would be all over that sugar. Now talk about it up and down the trunks of the trees. You've got insects galore all over those trees. That brings in other species that are feeding on those insects. I've seen bears climbing pines, going for the pine cones. I've seen bears licking the sap off of pine trees. Similarly, again, you've got nesting birds, owls, the great horned owl here. There was a nest in this pine right next to this that are then feeding on the other things that are attracted to those trees. Hemlock, another one of our great forest evergreens here, stunning soft texture. Look, you've got the male and female cone production on here. Again, a wealth of a resource for insects. Then the birds come in. You've got the young robin here that's feeding on the insects that are feeding on the hemlock. And again, remember, evergreens produce great habitat. This is a shelter for all sorts of wildlife. You'll find larger fauna members, deer, elk, moose, that really seek out those evergreen forests for refuge, especially in the warmer months and in the colder months. They're looking for shade or they're looking for insulation. So it's not always just about food source. Sometimes it's about habitat as well. This prairie warbler, I know we talked about this already. I won't continue to bore you this, but I was watching this prairie warbler like a hummingbird going in and feeding. It was inserting its bill into the fascicle of each one of these needle clusters. So the fascicle is actually a little sheath that holds the needles onto the branch. I watched it inserting its bill into the fascicle, and I'm assuming it was pulling insects that were inside that fascicle that were using those fascicles as a home. It was feeding on the insects that were occurring in each one of those fascicles, but it was checking each and every one and then moving on to the next like a hummingbird. It was absolutely incredible. So it's just amazing the microscopic things that are occurring that if we, I'm fortunate enough to be a photographer and have a long lens and be able to observe some of this stuff, but otherwise it's sometimes is beyond our grasp and beyond our observation capabilities. Bald cypress, I can't say enough for bald cypress. This is another one, anaerobic soil conditions. Here you see them growing in the marsh, in the swamp. Anaerobic means anaerobic. It doesn't just mean that they are poor oxygen exchange soils because it's a wet soil. It could mean that it's also a dry soil. There's a stand of bald cypress growing in a median that I know, in the middle of a highway that is rock hard concrete clay and never receives any irrigation and probably doesn't get much rain unless we get, multiple days on end because the water runs right off it and they are thriving in that environment. So anyway, that concludes today's discussion. I hope that you all took something away from that. I hope that if you have any questions, you would feel free to reach out to me at the store here. I'd be more than happy, as I mentioned, to chat with anybody about trees or plants or all things native at any time or anything else you might need help with. Again, my name was Michael, and I typically am here at the Fair Oaks store. And thank you all very much for attending.
Thanks so much, Michael. And before we conclude, just a quick reminder to everybody that you can expect your follow-up email tomorrow. So, Michael, is there anything else you want to wrap up with before we close out?
No, thank you so much for asking me to share this lovely day and topic with everybody, and appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you all so much, and we'll see you soon. Bye.
All right. Thanks, Sally.